Welcome to our WORKTECH video. I'd like to invite my colleagues and participants to join. We have a very exciting hour in store for you. WORKTECH, as you know, has been temporarily paused. We normally run WORKTECH live in 29 cities every year with a phenomenal array of ideas, content, speakers. And during this unprecedented time, we want to bring you that continuation of a stream of ideas and thoughts as we plan for what we call the new normal, whatever that might be. So I'm delighted today to welcome three esteemed thinkers around the world of workplace and real estate to join me, and obviously welcome you all to the WORKTECH live debate to join in that conversation. So let me introduce my panelists. Firstly, Jamie, if you could put your video on. Jamie Davis, who is Associate Director of Change for Corporate Services at Fidelity International. Jamie, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Chuck Cerria, who's Director of Global Real Estate and Workplace Strategy from FTI Consulting. Chuck, welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
And finally, the third person is Paul Statham, the founder and CEO of Condeco. Paul, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon.
So look, we have a fantastic hour together, and you know what more could we want in terms of an inflection point for the workplace? Obviously led by a scene and scenarios that were unexpected. But Paul, you produced a report a few months ago, earlier this year, called The Modern Workplace, where you obviously polled 1,000 people pre-COVID and talked a bit about the idea of remote working and the future of the workplace. And at that time, 62% of people said that they would expect more remote working next year. I guess that number might have changed. What was your perspective when you ran that report, and what's changed since?
It's quite amazing. We thought we'd expect to see that number around 60%, and it was good to we ran the report to find out exactly what people thought. And I think at the time it was very accurate around the sentiments we were hearing from our client base and others. I think it would be very different if we were to run it now. I think for a start, everyone, probably 99% of the workforce or the office workforce, has worked from home now for a considerable amount of time. And I think going forward, that number would rise. And I think we have another workplace report coming out, and I think we may re-poll that before we republish, because I think it would have most certainly have changed.
I mean, remarkable, isn't it? I mean, Jamie, what was your experience at Fidelity before COVID around the idea of remote working? You know, how far had Fidelity gone on that journey?
We're about a year, 18 months into a program of new ways of working. Certainly in the UK, the idea of working from home was a well-known activity. And through the advances of technology over the last couple of years, it's enabled us to work from home. And it's something that over the last 10 weeks has been our normal across the world. And in fact, the first day of the UK lockdown, we saw nearly 6,500 employees remote working into Fidelity systems.
Yeah. So it was not much of a shock, really. You were kind of prepared and on that journey anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, we're very fortunate that the technology chaps got all the solutions in place prior to this actually happening. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we've missed a step. I think we've obviously adjusted, and things are different. But I don't think as an organisation we've particularly missed a step.
It's really intriguing. Chuck, what's been your experience? I mean, obviously things are slightly stressed in New York at the moment. Give us your vision.
Yeah, I would agree very much with Jamie in terms of the drastic change that we've encountered as well. We've been lucky to have great business continuity. We maybe weren't as far along on the journey like some other companies as well in the remote working and flexible working, but we have a significant portion of our employees who have been doing that for years. And then we just got thrust, into that with very little notice. So, kudos to the teams involved on that. And again, I think many companies are in similar boats on that. We really were very seamless in that transition, which was nice. But, as I think everyone's aware, in the US, we were kind of caught off guard, maybe expecting it more in Asia and other countries. And all of a sudden, things changed pretty quickly. So We're very fortunate with the technologies that we have in place now and the teams we have in place, and business continuity was a real priority up front.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that you hear so many companies that were ready have had a very seamless approach, transitioning to the idea that we don't all come into this container every day. And much to many people's surprise, right? I think that for so many years we heard people saying, we can't work remotely, we can't work from home for confidentiality or for compliance reasons or other behavioural reasons. What's been that experience in terms of culture and behavioural change, and has that been difficult for some of your people?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first. I would say that it's amazing how employees have been thrust into this position, and managers and employees have realized they're more productive as a result of working at home. Now, obviously, with the pandemic, there's a lot of considerations that are above normal conditions, with the home life and children and caregiving and where you live, and everyone's personal situation is quite different. So if you put that to the side in normal times, I think people have been amazed to realize how productive many employees have been, and maybe more so than pre-COVID. It's really been interesting. And from a distributed team standpoint, we've seen that using the VC technologies, let's say Microsoft Teams and others out there, our teams have actually gotten closer and more productive and bonded more by having that visual connection, more so than pre-COVID, where people were really just on the phone internally and with clients and whatnot. So it's really been an amazing shift because of the pandemic.
So it's enhancing experience and productivity. I mean, Jamie, have you found the same with Fidelity? Has that been an improvement, or?
Yeah, I think the online tools are fantastic, and as I say, as an organisation, we've made the transition very quickly. Would we have chosen to do it? I suspect it's the same with all organisations, and probably not. But it has demonstrated it is possible. What will our new normal be? Again, it's difficult to say. Will we crave to be back in the office with colleagues, or will we get used to this idea of remote working and working from home?
And have you found better collaboration? I mean, I'm intrigued. Obviously, you're responsible for change. I mean, do people find it a challenge to change and adopt these new behaviours, techniques, technologies, or has it been quite seamless?
I think the change process speed has been incredibly fast, and everybody has adapted to it in the round extremely well. We've got to recognise that the idea of remote working isn't for everybody. There are some people who perhaps live alone, who perhaps don't have the space, maybe house share, maybe have young children. So it's incredibly difficult for some people. There are people such as myself who are very fortunate to have the space to retreat to for the day and work without disruption.
And Paul, I mean, it's interesting. Back to the report. I mean, you also talked about right-sizing the workplace. And again, you had great foresight, because I think in your research, you talked to numbers around 50% in terms of maybe a cut in real estate costs. That looks now real, doesn't it?
It's, we didn't have a crystal ball to this, but we've been monitoring workspace for years now with different technologies, booking technologies, sensing technologies, the technologies that we've been using with our clients. And we've always seen this, and we've been talking quite openly that we've seen this underutilization of workspace, where traditionally buildings or infrastructures are designed for what we call the 80%. It's, there's 80% of people want to come into the office at some period of time, normally on a Monday. So the whole of real estate has been designing the real estate platform for that 80% spike on a Monday. And it's been difficult to tell people when they're saying to us, oh no, our buildings, we can't reduce our space. We're saying, look, that every study we do is telling you that after Monday, from Tuesday lunchtime onwards, you're running at between 60 and 30% occupancy. But people weren't really there. And I think what's happened now is that people are probably realizing that 50% utilization of space, if you can just manage that first blip, which used to be the Monday morning, which I think the changes to the working week of flexible working and home working is going to really drive that home, I think 50% is very achievable if companies feel that that's where they want to go. Some won't, but it's most certainly now. I believe that future state, which we were aiming towards over many years, I think could be reached much quicker.
I mean, that's a big number. I mean, if organizations could really reduce their real estate requirement by 50% and not feel any negative impact, that has a huge impact on the bottom line. I mean, Chuck, what's your perspective? Do you think that's a real achievable number?
You know, I would say in the near term, I'm not sure that it is, frankly, given that, you know, many companies' leases are longer term, you know, at least 5, 10, 15 years, depending on the region, location, and the scale of the office. I think over time, you know, this shift will definitely move in that direction. To your point, Paul, absolutely. But it will take a little bit of time to get through the near term, the now and the near term, and then the longer term, you know, response to this pandemic and getting the organizational change that's required to achieve that. I don't see offices going away, but to your point, definitely, you know, cost savings has always been a core metric for us to focus on in a corporate real estate role, and it'll continue to be so, especially in these, you know, difficult times and potential economic climate, you know, tough times as well.
I think the way we use space, I agree, leases are, you know, there's people out there with 25-year leases, and I think our city centres and our offices are not going anywhere. I think we enjoy collaborating together. We want to be in these spaces. So, you know, I think it's about how those spaces evolve and are used for different purposes over time. And I think, you know, I don't think this is happening this side of the new year, but I think over the next 5 years, I think there'll be a dramatic move to a whole new way of space design, and then a way that we interact with it. And I don't think, you know, the new normal, as Jamie was just talking about, I think is one of those things that, you know, it is very evolving at the moment, and is going to get clearer over time. And it's most certainly not time that's over weeks or months. This is a 2 or 3 year evolution from where we're heading. I believe, and that we're seeing.
I mean, it's interesting, Paul. I mean, as that space changes, I guess people's experience of it will change. I mean, I don't know what you think, Jamie, but if you could model the ideal experience that people want, you know, i.e. they can do some activities from home, but as you said, we've all just pointed out, people will still want to come in. What kind of experiences will they need or demand when they come in? How do you see that evolving?
Well, I think from a business perspective, you know, we bring people together for positive conflict. Okay, so that's co-creation, spontaneous discussion, collaboration, idea generation. That's what the business wants to get out of bringing people together. The employee, of course, they want a social interaction. You know, your colleagues aren't just colleagues; they're also, you know, something more than that. They're in many cases friends. So, you know, going to work for a great deal of people isn't a chore. You know, fortunately, for many, it's not. So, you know, there's 2 competing ideas here. The first is that workplace just becomes about collaboration, and you just go there to meet and talk to one another. There's the other, which is I don't have the domestic setup that allows me to work from home, so I need to go into the office, and I actually quite enjoy going there because I get to interact with my colleagues.
I like that.
We recently carried out a survey of employees. As we're obviously we've only got 350 employees, but there are, it's not the majority, but there are a number of employees that are quite, you know, are quite vocal on the fact that they need to get out of their current environment because it's constrictive and it's not good for the well-being. So I think employee well-being is going to become very, very important, and workspace and well-being have always been tied, and I think they're going to get even closer into that time.
I mean, that's interesting. So, you know, who's in charge of that within the corporate? I mean, if you look at employee experience and it touches on things around well-being, where does the ownership of that reside? Any thoughts? And is it in today's org chart, or is there a new role emerging?
I think it's a shared responsibility. There's many stakeholders, right? So it's organizational leadership, as much as it is employee opinion, as well as your organization values and norms. Overlay that with regulation, you know, all those factors, and probably many more in a lot of other organizations, come together to create that workplace experience that you craft together.
Mm.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with that. I mean, it's definitely not under, you know, one department or group right now. It's a group effort between usually a real estate, technology, or IT, HR, finance, you know, the whole corporate function for many companies. And it's imperative that we collaborate and partner together to improve that employee experience from the different lenses that we each have. You know, we view it in real estate very much about making our workplace a catalyst, you know, for the business to help, you know, cross-segment collaboration and general collaboration amongst our employees, also to attract top talent and to retain, you know, and reduce attrition as well. So we don't view real estate just as a byproduct of the business. We want to make it a key indicator and a key part of that. And I think this pandemic has really shined a light on that full employee experience that we've all been working on for some time, I think, some further than others. But, you know, we really need to think about not only our office spaces in the workplace, but also where our employees are coming from, how they're getting to work, you know, that experience at work, to and from the office, and getting home and going to client sites, et cetera. So there's a lot to think about there in that journey.
So it really is about an end-to-end experience. You're defining the idea that work is no longer at the front door of the office. It extends now to both the home, but spaces in between as well. I mean, let's touch on obviously the pandemic, and maybe Sam, can we maybe just run the first poll? I mean, for our attendees, and we've got a really nice, interesting range of attendees. We're going to run a couple of polls during this session. So if you wouldn't mind just voting live on this question. So let's start off. You know, what's the impact of the pandemic on the workplace? Are we seeing transformational change, significant or moderate? You know, will we in 2 years' time be right back to where we've been and reflect on nothing much changed? So as they're coming in, we've got about 180 people live at the moment, and quite an interesting collection from around the globe. So I am monitoring your questions, so please do continue to ask questions, and I'll weave in those to our conversation. Interesting. Okay, so mostly transformational, but not significantly so. You know, that's a balance between transformational and significant, but it does point to change, doesn't it? So let's turn to COVID. I mean, what has that done so far to your thinking and your organization's thinking? Paul, we'll start with you.
Obviously we are in the whole space of workspace scheduling and digital transformation of that space. So it's from two sides. I'll start as an employer and a company side. From company side, it's totally changed the way that we think. We've obviously, as everyone has been saying, we're working from home. We've seen some interesting changes. We were fortunate enough that technology was always a remote part of remote technology is always part of our working anyway. So that switch was quite smooth. And what we've actually seen in certain parts of the business, we've actually seen productivity go up, particularly in our engineering and development teams. Collaboration has gone through the roof, which is great to see. But we are seeing, as I said, some stresses, not major stresses, but some bits of well-being where people want to get back in and start to collaborate again. And we've actually had clients that want to come back into our offices for meetings already. We're seeing that in Europe. So it's had an interesting change, as I say, productivity-wise, and as a company, we've remained steady and focused on where we're going. From a company point of view, we've seen demand in parts of what we do rise dramatically. Obviously, the way that people now get back into their offices and what the new normal looks like for the office space has generated a massive spike for our sales team to be dealing with, which is a very, I suppose, interesting and in some ways positive. But the pandemic has obviously highlighted that people do want to look at working flexibly going forward, which we were pointing out in the report, but is happening even quicker. So it's really what we're seeing.
I mean, I think that's you know, this is talking to the idea of an employee first approach. And Chuck, I know we discussed this the other day, that you know, the idea of safety, health, well-being is really top of the agenda. How are you approaching it?
Yeah, I think most people are familiar with the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and you know, you kind of get back to those principles, and people want to be safe when they come back to the office. And you know, we're really trying to make a workplace where people can feel that way, included, empowered, you know, supported. And it's not a one-size-fits-all, as we've said before, and Jamie and Paul have highlighted this already with their employees. Everyone's in a different situation based on what's going on, but if you stay true to those principles and craft a solution that is employee first and very transparent in real time, you know, we're learning new things about the situation day by day, and I think we need to react accordingly. So it's incumbent upon leadership like us to be compassionate, I think, and really, and to your point, put the employee first, and give the flexibility that's warranted to address the varying degrees of people's needs at this point, and focusing on the employees and not profits at the moment, because that's really where it should be, the focus.
I mean, what's intriguing is most organisations talk to the idea of diversity and inclusion as core corporate values. Is this the big tipping point? You know, can we now really take this seriously, that you know, people who struggle to get to an office or who have particular needs can now be engaged and as effective as anyone else? Jamie, what's your perspective on that?
Oh, I'd like to think that is the case. You know, I think there's a lot that's happened in recent weeks. You know, it's shone a light on the climate. It's shone a light on race relations. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of reflection going on. My cynical side is, you know, as a human species, we very quickly forget, and we conform to type. I hope that's not the case, but my suspicion is the lessons that we could have learned during this period will diminish as time goes on.
Interesting, isn't it?
I think safety. Just saying. So just to come on from that, I think we will forget parts of it, but I think the human safety side of things, which I think every company has put, and every government around the world has put, you know, the lockdown was to protect us, not to control us. And I think it's, in the majority of cases, it's worked very successfully. And I think that and Chuck mentioned the commute, and understanding that people who are really struggling to get to the office, instead of saying, well, it's take it or leave it, I think we will really be, I believe as an employer, I know us as a company, we've sat down and said that people don't want to come to work to the office indefinitely, they can work from home if that's their choice, and that's where they feel the most productive and the most secure in the current climate, but also the most productive going forward. So I think the employee will remain having a significant voice in the way that employers view where they work and how they work, because I think the level of trust has gone up as an employer. Not that we didn't trust any of our staff, but I think, yeah, I'm really, really impressed with the way the global workforce has stepped up to the plate and are delivering really great, strong results across the whole of the business world. I think we've adapted as human beings, and I think the employers and the businesses around the world are going to listen and say, look, you know, we didn't really know whether to trust people working from home or not. We didn't really know what was going on, but we've seen that, you know, when asked, people have gone home, been productive, turned up every day and done their job. And I know myself as an employer, won't forget that in a hurry, and will realise that they've truly, I think that's the really true credit to the employees who have done remarkably well in proving that they really can be trusted to do their bit when there is no physical controls, there is no visual controls. You're simply asking people to carry on doing their job, and they're doing it. I think it's wonderful. I think that's part of the change, where the trust and the empathy between the employer and the employee will be a bond that will take a while. You know, I hope will never break. I think that's really strong.
Talking of bonds, there's an interesting question that's come in about recruitment and retention, and whether we need to now continue to be able to offer work from home permanently to attract talent. But also when you do onboard somebody new, going back to Paul's point about bonds, I mean, how easy would it be to infuse people into the culture, to get to know them if they come on board and remote work from the beginning? What are your thoughts?
I think it's extremely difficult now, obviously, to onboard employees and get people indoctrinated into your company. But I think it goes back to Paul's point as well about, the global management team has been doing a really nice job being inclusive and bringing people on board and being collaborative in that regard. I know at our company we had a nice video go out for interns that are happening. Internships are happening remotely this summer, like many other companies, I think, as well. So it's really important to use the tools that we have, the digital transformation and collaboration tools, to make sure they feel as part of the team, even though we may not be together with them in person. So I think, that touch point in the office will never go away, longer term, but that's where the perspectives of the now, the near term, and the long term really comes into play, and how we attack each of those independently, and need to look at that with the appropriate lens.
And Jamie, I mean, your thought about onboarding and how you get the culture, to be part of somebody's DNA. And any thoughts, given that you had begun this journey towards more remote working?
Well, I think some might describe it as loss of value, but in reality, it's changing values, and that can be influenced. It's more to do with as you end up with a more desperate workforce. It's more to do with connection, in my mind, and those are the challenges that you've got to wrestle with. But the gains are huge. So you gain through diversity, and if we roll it on to a global view, you could have a workforce in any corner of the world, and the value that you get from that broadened diversity potentially huge.
There's an interesting question here. I'll actually read it. In the new normal, we will not be close to many colleagues. Are we losing collaborative activities and the power of this for innovation within companies, process, and products? And that was from Anderson Benite. Any thoughts on that? When we lose that closeness, what happens? But I mean, I guess it's interesting because you're all part of global organizations where I guess collaboration anyway has to happen over distance. So what are we losing, and what are we having just to rethink?
Well, based on current experience, I don't think we're losing a great deal. In my experience, I understand the fears. I for one, are really quite keen to get back and engage with my colleagues face to face, spontaneous conversations. The banter that goes on between us, the co-working, creating that comfortable space within which to work. It's much harder to do that remotely. But to answer the question directly, I think it will depend on the organizational culture. Different organizations will respond differently. There will be those that go all out and are happy with remote working for either improved diversity or efficiency saves. There will be those that retreat back into the office as quickly as possible. My gut is most will fill the middle ground.
I think on that note, well, Sam, we'll run the second poll, because that begins to talk about the way we're going to think about the office in the future. So the poll is: the impact of COVID-19 on the open plan office will be. So let's see, and then we can begin to talk to the idea that this would change. So are we going to see the revival of cellularization and private spaces? Are we just looking at reduction of occupancy levels, or are we having no material effect? Looking like a pretty solid occupancy level. So let's begin the debate about the way back to the office, the return to the office planning that we're all seeing. I want to start about the role of data, or data, Chuck, if I have to get it right for our friends on that side of the pond. But what is the role of data? How do you all use it at the moment, and what could be used in the future? Chuck, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I think we've all, most companies are beginning big data for at least a few years now, if not longer. And I think many have been struggling with how to leverage it to the fullest extent. I mean, I do think that, you know, the office environment will normalize longer term as a vaccine becomes available and things progress and we learn more and we get a little more certainty here. So I don't see any drastic changes to the design of the office at this point. But to your point, I think with data, we can learn so much. And, you know, I can't say we've cracked the code. You know, it's challenging to interpret data, to get all that valuable data and to have the right people involved to make sense of it. But, you know, we've leveraged trying to understand utilization data as much as possible. And we've heard some percentages earlier that are pretty much spot on, about 50% occupancy. And that may reduce over time, I think, as well. So leveraging utilization data, sensor data, you know, booking space with workplace technology as well. Anything and everything that we can get data on, you know, we're trying to use that as a catalyst to make the decisions long-term, especially.
And Jamie, what's your approach? I know when we had a chat, you were talking about a data-driven approach to thinking. How do you see the future?
I think data is huge, and of course not just data, but what you do with it. I think it gives you a forensic look at your operation. It allows you to move faster and respond to what the new normal might be. It prevents knee-jerk reactions and you know, dispels assumptions that people might make about what we might look like, and it very quickly removes options off the table. You know, it's all about giving greater certainty and confidence in our ability to understand what the future might look like. And we're certainly using data in two capacities. So we've got the live data, which is for an app-based approach to give our employees instant access to things like booking a desk, visitor management, those types of things. And then we've got the pool of recorded data, which gives us our insight about utilization trends, patterns, how that's changing.
And who uses that data? Is that a kind of a CRE type function, or is it being used by other parts of the organization or leadership to now make decisions?
Very much being used by the leadership to make decisions. You know, you talk about real estate efficiency. There is an awful lot of perception in that discussion. Once you put the data on the table and you can validate that data is accurate, the conversation tends to change quite quickly and becomes more about solutions rather than discussing whether we believe the data to be true.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Music to your ears, Paul, because I mean, obviously you've been on a journey for a long time to try and generate the data, right, that we need through the workplace. What's your view?
Yeah, it is music to our ears, and I think the data-driven design is something that we've been very keen to work with, and I think we've known the data. And interestingly, I think the world of corporate real estate has known the data. The big problem that they've had is getting people. You know, 50% occupancy is universal across most of the real estate. The problem is they don't know which 50% of the employee wants to come in at which time into which building and where they want to sit, because the employee's not been playing ball with the situation. What we're seeing a little bit more and this is very early days yet, but the way that we're approaching the return to the new normal is with the employee wanting to work more from home, they're actually selecting whether they work from home or work from a particular building or location. Now that's data that we've never had before. We've all had when they turned up and sat down or booked something and not turned up, but we've now got their actual desire at the point of them making that choice. Now, by capturing that data, and we've just added this into our app, by adding that data in, we've now got the final piece of the puzzle that I think has been the problem, is that who wants to come in and on what day, and how do we balance that need? But data will drive the workspace will be computer generated over the next 3 years, once with millions, trillions of lines of data of who booked what, where, what they used, why they used it, when they turned up, what they said they were going to do against what they didn't do. but we've now got this. I think the final piece of the puzzle is going to make these guys' lives so much easier, because we'll be able to actually tell you what the intent of use is going to be. And we've never had that before. We've always had usage from the point of arrival. We are now capturing usage from the point of thought, of what do I want to do today, or what am I going to do next week? And that means that we can predict the future, and we can map buildings and control occupancy. Even more importantly, we can start to manage that occupancy, which will drive a much better working experience for the employee and the general use of the building, and get much better. You talk about density and wide open spaces. You know, density will be reduced, I believe, and I think generally, not just because of the pandemic, but I think we've got over dense in some of the workspace environments because of the fact we were trying to squeeze those busy Monday mornings into a smaller piece of real estate without major investment. I think if we know that we really don't need to do that, we can take the leases that are currently owned around the world. You know, it's not all about saving money. It can be producing that utopian workspace that really does do what people want it to do and when they want it to do it. And all we're now asking people to do is tell us when they're going to come in and what they need. So I think there is a really positive, strong message that will come out of employee engaging in really dealing with what they need, and the data will drive that decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah. Sorry, Chuck, you were first. Absolutely.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was just going to answer. I couldn't agree more with what Paul was saying, and you know, we're hoping that through the workplace technology platforms that we have in place, that we really will improve the employee experience and give people that confidence to come into the office or plan appropriately and get that visibility that we've never had before, to your point. And I think there's this intangible benefit of it's one thing for the global real estate and the real estate folks like myself to know what people are doing and have that information or pretend to know, but for employees to see that that technology through app-based systems or whatever have you, and to know that they're coming into again a safe environment or an environment that's ready for them the following day or when they need the space, goes a tremendous way to us moving forward, especially longer term in that transformation that I think we talked about earlier.
I mean, I think this is a fantastic vision, isn't it? I mean, you know, to some extent, we've always had dumb containers for work. I mean, real estate's been pretty dumb, and we're now kind of painting a picture of real-time real estate. You know, that the fact that the building can be load balanced, and that's a remarkable transition for the profession, really, isn't it? That property suddenly has data to allow a very different approach, more like airlines or other industries have been very good at load balancing. We can now achieve the same. There's a really interesting question about anticipatory design principles and the link back to smart buildings, and at the moment the struggle with transport to get to buildings. So, you know, do we see, Paul, the idea that your platforms are going to be, you know, less about booking space and resources and more about preferences and allocating and staggering and allowing people to choose based on great data?
Yeah, I think interesting at the moment during the pandemic position, we're even getting down to making people select times to arrive at buildings so they can use elevators or lifts to get on high-rise floors. So yes, in the short term or in the immediate term, there's going to be the need to actually understand what people need and how they're going to do that and use that data to make it happen. I think in the long term, I think the beauty of that the workplace interaction with the workplace will be that people will be able to select and see. You mentioned hotel or airlines, same as hotels and airlines, people will be able to book in advance what they need, and you'll be able to provide a much better service. So I think the smart building of the future is going to get smarter. At the moment, smart buildings tend to be, as I've said before, when you tend to get there, they become smart. I think because that is now going to move out, really the workplace is now everywhere. And so when you come in to collaborate, meet with your colleagues, just meet for a coffee or a chat, you know, you really do need to understand there's no point coming into an office to meet with your colleagues for a chat if they're working from home that day. So you need to know what they're doing in advance. Otherwise, you know, guess what? You've traveled in, commuted in for an hour. And I think you will end up with satellite offices so that people won't commute so much, that still allow collaboration and meeting up, which is a bit of more of an old-fashioned model. More of a model, particularly in America, of the 50s and 60s, where you had these satellite buildings. which were really for collaboration on an irregular basis. So that may be again something we see a resurgence of or return to.
I mean, it's interesting. In the previous webinar with General Stanley McChrystal, we talked to the idea of new clusters and the idea of using organizational network analysis tools, such as what Microsoft 365 can produce, is really intriguing. So if you overlay what a Microsoft Workplace Intelligence graph can show you about who's really interacting with who, and you look at the smart building technologies and solutions, that gives you a different paradigm, doesn't it? Because you can then begin, as you said, to suggest who should come in on which day and who you should be working with, and suggest what you might prefer, right? So nudging is the next big iteration. So do you all see the idea that we might be able to now use deep learning, artificial intelligence, to begin to kind of use algorithms to make suggestions and recommendations?
Oh, I'd love the idea of an app, a solution that said, you collaborate with these people regularly. By the way, they're all together on Wednesday. Do you want to go into the office? Yeah. It takes some of the thinking out of the problem. Similarly, if you're traveling around the world, and there's a hub that lots of people travel into, how handy would it be to know who's traveling there, so that you don't have to travel to another destination to meet people because you've discovered that they're at the same destination. There's so many facets to this that take the thinking out of the problem, and different organizations will apply it differently, but I believe in it absolutely, that this level of technology integration isn't just on its way, it's here. It just needs the right architecture to make it right for each company.
And it's happening, in our lives elsewhere with e-commerce and online marketing and things of that nature, where, we are getting better experiences as consumers based on our interests and what we buy and all those algorithms. So I think from a real estate perspective, in recent years, we've all tried to improve the employee experience, but probably a bit blindly, some, again, more than others, depending on the data you had and the information you've gotten on your employees. But I think going forward, if we're able to leverage that AI and that kind of technology to really, give our employees the best possible experience based on what they do, who they interact with, and where they need to be, that's only a positive. And I think from a cost standpoint, that's one area that's always concerning, is how do you fund these types of things and how do you move forward on that? And that's where you really have to go back to the company's culture and values. And maybe there's an opportunity from reduced travel or reduced office supplies and things of that nature, especially near term and now, maybe a bit more longer term, that you can reallocate funds that were spent on those areas previously to this new infrastructure and technology.
I think it's a great point, and I think linking it back into marketing and social media and technology as a consumer, I think what we're seeing is that why we get such good service from technology as a consumer is because we give the information of what we want and what we like by giving cookies and giving information. I think the real estate team, as you say, see an office or previously may see a building just as a building. If we are actually asking the employee about what you want to do, where you want to do it, and they start to see the reason, it's not tracking them because we want to know where you are and whether you've done something that's not in the office. We're expecting you not to be in the office, but we want you to tell us what you want, whether it's to go to a hub to meet a friend in New York, whether it's to go into a remote office, or whether it's some personal space. If you tell us what you need, then we've got the systems as companies. We can provide. The technology exists. We prove the technology exists. If you say you want to work from home for a year, the video will allow that to happen. If you want to pop into a hub in New York, we can make that happen. But if you keep the employee on the outside of the debate and if not on the inside of the debate, the consumer is the consumer. It's the inside. Everything is based around a consumer. If we make everything based around an employee, what's an employee want to be more productive? What's an employee's choice to make them happier, stay with the company longer, and to be honest, work even harder, which is what most employers want their employees to do. Make them happy, give them what they want, which means just ask them, get them to tell you what they want and where they want to do it. And guess what? It all suddenly falls into place. And I think it's a great, I hadn't thought about it in such a way. The consumer world has been doing this for years by saying, you know, we can give you loads of information about what you're trying to find, as long as you tell us what that is. And I think that's a great analogy of the future in the employee being in the center of the situation. The same with safety. If you want to be safe, get home and we'll look after you. So I think it's great.
I mean, it talks to some of the major trends, doesn't it, this conversation? I mean, the idea of a gamified workplace, a bit like we rank our Uber driver as a 5-star experience, we rank our workplace in the future. I think the consumerized workplace, so we want it to look a little bit more like home and not so sterile. And this idea that we're actually discussing the idea of provisioning work, aren't we? I mean, we're no longer people who create the workplace and that's the office. We're just provisioning work. We're enabling people to do great work and providing the tools for them to be flexible and allow choice. It's interesting, one question that's come up is could we allow, or could we measure the fact that, are you leaving the office feeling better than when you arrived? You know, how does wellness data change through the day? And that was actually covered in another discussion we had recently with ART, a company that's been working on a workplace lab, where they are measuring the fact that you could come into the office and leave feeling healthier and better. So maybe that's part of the richness. Sam, let's run poll number 4 actually as the last poll for this session, because that kind of talks to the next question I'd like you to all look at. So in a post-COVID workplace, the employee will view the office as, let's see what our audience feels. That's looking like very strongly the place to kind of come in and collaborate and meet. So that borrows back on some of those original thoughts. I mean, if the three of you could take a blank sheet of paper and redefine the office, what would you draw? What would you create from scratch without the constraints of leases and current fit outs? Chuck, let's start with you.
That's a tough question. You know, I think we're learning so much given this pandemic and the situation we're in, and it's such a great opportunity. It's really how we respond to it. So to your point, you know, I agree with the poll. I don't see the workplace being, you know, primary for every company. I think many companies it'll still be primary, but in a different lens. But I think we must focus on health and well-being, resiliency, sustainability in our workplaces, you know, by introducing and making sure we have natural light and biophilia and, you know, the appropriate nutrients and airflow and all those things that maybe were secondary focuses previously. They need to come to the forefront. And I know I'm hoping that we can do that. And I'm hearing from other colleagues and folks in the industry that they're looking at it as well. There's some great tools out in the industry now with the well building standard and others that are great tools that we can use to get there as well. But I think it would be amazing if we get to the point where we could improve how employees feel from when they first walk in to they leave. And I think that hasn't been the case historically. The office has just been the office, but we have much more responsibility now, knowing what we know and having this opportunity.
Jamie, how do you feel if you could redesign from scratch?
Well, yeah, like Chuck, it's an impossible question, isn't it? What I would say is I think there's been a lot in the press recently about the agile office is dead and one-to-one seating is what we need, and I think those articles miss the point. I think that the current public health emergency isn't about shared facilities. It's about social distancing. It's about density. So I actually think that the route to the agile environment, the flexible workplace, is probably going to accelerate as a consequence of the last 10 weeks. And as I say, it won't be one large change. There will be hundreds of small changes that you know, levers that companies pull on to create the right environment for them and their employees. So I think agile workplaces, smaller workplaces potentially are the way we will go, because there has to be a balance between the financial benefits of having workspace and how we're asking our employees to use those spaces.
Yeah, I mean, the levers are really interesting. And I mean, Paul, I was depressed by the government's mandate that hot desking is frowned upon or shouldn't be allowed anymore in a COVID workplace. I mean, to some extent, you know, if you have an allocated desk and it's cluttered, you know, you can't really clean it, right? You can't sanitize it every night. And also, it's very difficult to load balance the building each day because the people who own those desks around you can't be in on the same day. So it becomes a tough logistical jigsaw puzzle to get people who are owning desks to be in the space at the same time. You've got the technology, right, to signify if the desk is clean, has been used. What would your advice to the government be?
Yeah, I think hot desking in the form that you turn up and sit down and someone else gets up and the moment they get up you sit in it again, I think at the moment during the health crisis, during the pandemic, I think is obviously a no-no. And I think agile working and flexible working is most certainly going to be the way forward. You're going to have reduced density, you're going to have less desks, you're going to have the same amount of people. And to get that to work, you've got to basically make sure that you understand need and when people want to come in, that desk has been clearly identified in some way, that the cleaning team have been there on a changeover day. You know, we liken it to a hotel room. You turn up to a hotel room and you use it 3 days running, you get a general clean, you know, for the 2 middle days and then a deep clean when someone else comes in. Same as in desking. You need to know that if someone's using a private office for 2 or 3 days, then it can be cleaned in a standard way. If someone's changing over, it's going to be cleaned in a more thorough way. So I think that is the current situation, and I think that's going to go on for quite a long time. The thinking that you can simply give everyone their own desk, but also reduce density and put in social distancing of 2 meters. You know, these guys are going to go out and sign leases for millions of square feet of real estate. That's just not going to happen. You can't take on that level of real estate expansion in the current economic situation. So you've got to have some give and take in that situation. Otherwise it won't work. So sharing the desks that are available will be definite. They'll be shared by the day, not by the hour, because you need to get to an evening before they're cleaned, and you've got to have restrictions on them. So I think the guidelines are basically incorrect. You can't just turn around and say, don't share anything ever again. That's impossible. You know, in life, you're never, you know, but cleaning that thing that you're going to use, someone else is going to use before it's reused, is a fundamental. And social distancing, I think, is here for at least the next, you know, probably year or so. So I think, you know, this is something that I think's been put out very quickly and not thought through by the governments.
And I would add to that, Paul. Sorry, Phil, but I would add that I think the clear desk policy is really critical to success of that as well. Not only from a cleaning and sanitary standpoint, you need to make sure those surfaces are clean and free of clutter, as we mentioned before, Philip. But you know, now we're also hearing from employees and others in the industry about how they don't miss the paper that was in their office or at their desk and other things, the tchotchkes and whatnot. While it might be nice and reassuring, you know, we were thrust into this situation and everyone's been pretty productive as a result. So I think there's a little more acceptance about that clear desk policy in the workplace going forward, where we know that some people are more resident and others are more mobile. And I think we can work with each group. But if you have that principle of clear desk policy going forward, it gives you much more possibilities to really implement the correct strategies for your organization.
Yeah. I mean, we're almost at the end of our hour. It's been a really intriguing conversation. I haven't been able to tackle all the questions. But I guess if there's any investment needed, there's an interesting question about justifying the business case for any upfront costs or the measurement, the KPIs. Jamie and Chuck, I guess, what would be your key prerequisites to justifying a capital budget to making some of these changes?
Well, mine is at the moment is cleaning up our data, getting reliable, accurate, timely data. It's almost impossible to advise a business on what the change is and how that impacts, without having that quantitative intelligence to rely upon. So yeah, mine would be get good data.
I would second that, Jamie. I think you're spot on. This is a time now for our teams to really dig in and retool and get better when we come out of this. So we are better prepared. And part of that is making sure we are getting the right data if we haven't before, or to be, really going through that data in a very detailed manner to make sense of it, to get the right insights. I would also add that I think, and I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again, in the near term, there's definitely some budgets that, luckily won't have to be tapped into with travel restrictions and offices not being populated, that can easily be reallocated, with the right conversations, and you can build those business cases, I would say fairly easily. But I think using the data as the foundation for those discussions and the tools of those reallocation possibilities are really the recipe to getting you to the next step for a long-term digital transformation and improving the employee experience.
And obviously data comes from data sources, and that requires the idea of a digital workplace. That's what will generate the bits and the bytes. What do you see as the kind of challenge to Paul as the provider of those tools that generate data? What would you like Paul and other organizations like Paul's to give you to allow you to make your decisions in a more informed and accurate manner?
Well, my challenge to Paul and vendors like him is to keep up with customers' expectations, and I don't mean that harshly. I think there's going to be an awful lot of conversation. Some of it will be noise, but there'll be a lot of good nuggets of information out there in terms of what can be done. And one of the struggles is taking data and turning it into intelligence, and having that analytics tool and the ability to get access to good intelligence early is vital.
Totally agree on that. And I think what we're trying to do, and I think I've heard from others, trying to get multiple sources of data to cross-reference and to review, so there is that credibility and that confidence in it, because too often than not, we may have been too reliant on one source that has holes or gaps in that data. So you may come to insights, but it's not reliable enough to stand on its own. So if we can get the multiple sources of data with utilization and space planning and space occupancy and others, that's really the differentiator, I think. And to your point, Jamie, I think we've leaned very hard on our partners and vendors as well, and they have responded, more than adequately, very, very nicely. And we've seen a lot of literature out there in the marketplace and the industry, and it's really great to see all the knowledge sharing that's going on.
I mean, it's interesting. Before I get back to Paul, I mean, I'm finding it really intriguing that I'm seeing real estate property groups employing data scientists, and we have a really interesting view of data that you can aggregate it as you've described, and then apply typical regression and correlation to kind of get new trends and insights that are not obvious. So, Paul, how do you rise to this challenge? What's in flight? What's next?
It's a great challenge, and I think it's a challenge we've known for a long time. We've been monitoring data through every source you possibly can for a while. I think what I would actually flip the question back a little bit, or the point back, that I think we have the data, and I think actually, Jamie, you've mentioned it, it's understanding the data, or Chuck, one of you may have mentioned it. It's understanding the data and also asking the right questions. We've been providing utilization studies and booking data, and people don't believe it. It's like, well, that can't be right, and it's because it's not triangulated with the right other information, because it just doesn't feel right. And I think there's almost a blind faith that needs to come out of that we do. Our industry in workspace does capture an awful lot of data. It doesn't really know what to ask of that, because we're technology companies, not real estate planners. But I do believe that adding the employee intent, as I said, on top of all of the great data that is available, we're integrating with the likes of Tableau and Power BI now. We've got data lakes and data warehouses. We got more data than you could ever desire. What we now need, as you say, Philip, is the data scientists that truly can model what the future looks like. We are, we're part of the technology play that provides more data than these guys know what to do with most of the time. But understanding that and telling us, what that means so that we can build technology that makes it even easier to interact with, I think is the symbiotic relationship that we have with our clients. And I think is going to really drive this transformation. And I think for the first time, we've just come right the way back, that people of the employee first approach to the future is going to now demand that. We mentioned it earlier on, the employee and people at HR are turning up in our presentations and meetings at the moment. We've never had HR in the room. It's, real estate and FM, but HR. HR are actually interested in what we're doing now. That's never happened. So they're going to add the data of what is desired on top of what is actually used. And that's going to be really, really interesting. It's going to be a fascinating few years. It really is. So we got to, and I'll take the challenge that we listen and we keep up with we keep the technology one step ahead. We try and stay half a step behind you guys, because you do rush rather quickly, but we try and stay one step ahead, and we'll take that challenge on board.
Very good.
I mean, what's exciting for me is that, this idea of a digital twin, modeling the physical world and the digital world and bringing those together creates a huge opportunity for us all, and shapes experience, and maybe even helps us measure productivity, which has always been that kind of holy grail. So look, with that, we've had a fascinating hour's conversation. All of this will be through the WORKTECH Academy. You can watch this video, and please join the Academy and share the knowledge resources that we are generating globally, as we are all working from home during this period of time with COVID. But can you join me in thanking Paul, Jamie, and Chuck for a really fascinating hour? Thank you all very much, and look forward to joining us again soon. Thank you.